The rain fell in sheets upon Baker Street that October evening, drumming against the windows with a persistence that seemed almost deliberate. The gas lamps flickered weakly through the deluge, casting trembling shadows across our sitting room where I sat reading the evening paper. My friend Sherlock Holmes occupied his usual chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed in that state between waking thought and deeper contemplation. The fire crackled softly, providing the only sound beyond the rain's relentless rhythm. It was the sort of evening that invited reflection, though I could not have known then that before the clock struck midnight, we would be drawn into one of the most peculiar cases of our long association. The telegram arrived at 7:30. Mrs. Hudson brought it up with her customary efficiency, placing it upon the side table with a brief curtsy before departing. Holmes did not stir. The yellow envelope lay there for several minutes, ignored, until at last my curiosity overcame my restraint. I rose and handed it to him without comment. His eyes opened fully then, sharp and alert, as though he had been waiting for this precise moment. He took the telegram, examined the envelope with unusual care, and then held it unopened between his long fingers. Before we proceed further into this singular affair, permit me a small request. If these chronicles of mystery and deduction bring any measure of enjoyment to your evenings, I would be grateful if you might lend your support through a simple gesture. A subscription to these tales, a like, or sharing them with fellow enthusiasts of the curious and the strange, ensures that such accounts continue to find their audience. With that courtesy observed, let us return to that rain-swept evening and the telegram that would not, by all reasonable logic, exist. Holmes broke the seal at last and withdrew the slip of paper. I watched his face closely, knowing well the subtle shifts that betrayed his interest. His eyebrows rose a fraction, his lips compressed into a thin line. Then, without a word, he passed the telegram to me. The message was brief, typed in the standard manner of such communications. It read simply, "The matter we discussed proceeds as feared. Meet me at Paddington Station, Platform 7, 9 o'clock tonight. Bring Watson. Time is of the essence." It was signed Edmund Cartwright. The name meant nothing to me, though I searched my memory thoroughly. I looked to Holmes for explanation, but found his expression deeply troubled. That alone was sufficient to raise my concern, for Holmes was rarely discomfited by the unexpected. He rose from his chair with sudden energy and crossed to his desk, where he withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook. He flipped through its pages with quick precision, stopped at a particular entry, and then closed the book with a decisive snap. "Watson," he said quietly, "fetch your revolver and your coat. We must leave at once." His tone carried an urgency I had rarely heard. I did not question him, but moved immediately to comply. When I returned, He was already at the door, his own coat buttoned, his eyes distant with thought. Mrs. Hudson had called a cab, which waited below in the rain. We descended in silence and climbed aboard. Only when we were underway did I venture to speak. "Holmes, I confess I am entirely at sea. Who is Edmund Cartwright?" He turned his gaze from the rain-streaked window to meet my eyes. The lamplight from passing streets illuminated his face in brief flashes, revealing an expression I had rarely seen. It was something between sorrow and fascination, the look of a man confronting an impossibility. "Edmund Cartwright," he said slowly, "was a chemist of considerable skill, and a man who came to me 3 years ago with suspicions of industrial espionage. He was a methodical man, Watson, cautious and precise in all his habits." "Was?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. "Edmund Cartwright died 14 months ago," Holmes replied. "He was killed in a fire at his laboratory. The inquest concluded it was an accident caused by volatile chemicals. His death was confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt." The implications settled over me like a cold weight. "Then this telegram is either an elaborate hoax," Holmes interrupted, "or something far more troubling. But the signature is correct, Watson. The phrasing, the manner of address, even the request that you accompany me. These are details only Cartwright would have known." The cab rattled onward through the rain-dark streets. Neither of us spoke again until we arrived at Paddington Station. The great terminus was less crowded than usual, the foul weather having discouraged all but the most necessary travel. Gas lamps burned in rows along the platforms, their light diffused by the mist that crept in from the rain outside. We made our way to Platform 7, Holmes moving with that peculiar intensity that marked him when a case had fully seized his attention. The platform was nearly deserted. A porter pushed a trolley of luggage at the far end. An elderly woman sat upon a bench, her parcels arranged around her like fortifications. But of anyone resembling Edmund Cartwright, there was no sign. Holmes consulted his watch. It was 3 minutes past 9. We had not missed the appointed time by much. Yet the platform remained empty of our mysterious correspondent. Holmes began a methodical inspection of the area, his eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. I kept watch for any approaching figure, but the minutes passed with no arrival. It was I who noticed the folded paper tucked beneath a stone on the bench nearest the platform edge. I retrieved it and handed it to Holmes, who unfolded it quickly. The handwriting was hurried but legible. It read, "Forgive the deception. I could not risk being seen. Go to the luggage office. Ask for the case left in the name of Cartwright. You will understand everything. Destroy this note." Holmes did not destroy the note. Instead, he studied it carefully, holding it close to the lamplight, examining the paper quality, the ink, the very formation of the letters. At last he folded it and placed it in his pocket. "The hand is educated," he murmured. "Young, I would judge, and accustomed to precision. Note the consistency of the slope, the careful formation of each letter. This was written by someone who values accuracy. We walked together to the luggage office, a small cubicle set back from the main concourse. The clerk behind the counter was a balding man with spectacles that caught the light. Holmes addressed him with polite directness. "I am here to collect a case left in the name of Cartwright." The clerk nodded without surprise and disappeared into the back room. He returned carrying a leather traveling case, modest in size and showing signs of considerable wear. Holmes signed the required form, using Cartwright's name without hesitation, and we departed with our prize. We did not open the case at the station. Holmes insisted we return to Baker Street before examining its contents. The ride back seemed interminable, though in truth it could not have exceeded 20 minutes. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, and the streets gleamed wetly under the lamps. Mrs. Hudson had kept the fire burning, and our rooms were warm and welcoming after the damp chill of the station. Holmes placed the case upon the table and lit several additional lamps to provide ample illumination. Then, with careful hands, he opened the latches. Inside lay a collection of items that seemed, at first glance, entirely random. There was a bundle of letters tied with string, a small glass vial containing a clear liquid, a ledger book with a dark blue cover, a photograph of a man I did not recognize, and a folded document bearing an official seal. Holmes examined each item methodically, beginning with the photograph. He studied it for a long moment before passing it to me. The man in the image was in his 40s, well-dressed, with a severe expression and sharp eyes. The photograph was recent, judging by the style and quality. "Do you recognize him, Watson?" Holmes asked. I did not. Holmes took the photograph back and set it aside, then turned his attention to the letters. He untied the string and spread them across the table. There were 7 in total, all addressed to Edmund Cartwright at various locations. Holmes read through them with increasing interest, occasionally murmuring to himself. When he had finished, he looked up at me with an expression of grim satisfaction. "This is extraordinary," he said. "These letters are correspondence between Cartwright and a man named Aldous Fenwick, a businessman with interests in chemical manufacturing. They discuss a formula for a new industrial process, one with considerable commercial value." "But what has this to do with Cartwright's death?" I asked. Holmes tapped the letters with one finger. "Everything, Watson. These letters suggest that Fenwick wished to acquire Cartwright's formula through legitimate purchase. But the negotiations broke down. The final letter, dated 2 weeks before Cartwright's death, contains a barely veiled threat. Fenwick writes that he will obtain the formula by other means, if necessary." He reached for the ledger and opened it. The pages were filled with chemical notations and calculations in a neat, precise hand. Holmes examined them with obvious appreciation for their complexity. "This is Cartwright's work," he said. "The formula itself, recorded in his own hand. And here," he pointed to a page near the end, "is a note dated 1 week before his death. He writes that he suspects someone has been tampering with his laboratory equipment. He feared for his safety. The picture was becoming clearer, though many questions remained. I voiced the most obvious. Then you believe Cartwright's death was not an accident? Holmes closed the ledger carefully. I have believed that for some time, Watson. But without proof, there was nothing to be done. The inquest was thorough, the evidence seemingly conclusive. And yet, certain details troubled me. The intensity of the fire, for one. The fact that all of Cartwright's records were destroyed. The timing, so soon after these threatening letters. He lifted the small vial and held it up to the light. The liquid within was perfectly clear, showing no discoloration or sediment. This, I suspect, is the key. A sample of some chemical compound relevant to the formula. We shall have it analyzed tomorrow. He turned finally to the official document. Breaking the seal, he unfolded it and read in silence. His expression shifted subtly, registering first surprise, then understanding. When he finished, he passed it to me. It was a copy of a death certificate, but not Cartwright's. The name on the document was Aldous Fenwick. The date of death was recorded as 6 months previous. Cause of death: heart failure. Fenwick is dead as well, I said, stating the obvious in my confusion. Holmes nodded slowly. Indeed, which raises the question: who sent that telegram? Who left this case at Paddington Station? And most importantly, who wishes us to investigate these deaths now, 14 months and 6 months after they occurred? We sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling, the rain having stopped entirely. The case before us seemed to contain more questions than answers. Holmes refilled his pipe and lit it, drawing deeply, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the visible walls. At last he spoke. There is someone alive who knows the truth of what happened. The telegram was a summons, Watson, but also a test. Would I remember Cartwright? Would I respond to a message from a dead man? Having confirmed my interest, this person has provided the evidence needed to pursue the matter. But why not come forward directly? I asked. Why this elaborate pretense? Holmes smiled thinly. Fear, Watson. Whoever our mysterious correspondent is, they are in danger. They cannot risk being identified, not yet. But they wish justice done. So they use Cartwright's name, knowing it would intrigue me. And they provide the evidence at a safe remove. He stood and began pacing, his energy renewed by the intellectual challenge. Tomorrow we shall begin inquiries. We must learn everything we can about the circumstances of both deaths. We must investigate Aldous Fenwick's business dealings and associates. And we must discover who currently controls Cartwright's formula. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Holmes was already dressed and breakfasted when I emerged from my room. He had sent several telegrams before I woke and was expecting replies throughout the day. Our first visit was to the offices of Fenwick Chemical Works, located in a grimy industrial district south of the river. The building was substantial but shabby, its windows darkened with soot. The surrounding streets showed the grim effects of industrial progress. Blackened brick, air thick with chemical odors, and workers whose faces bore the marks of hard labor. We presented ourselves as potential investors interested in the company's operations. The manager who received us was a nervous man named Holloway, thin and pale, with darting eyes that never quite met ours directly. Holmes questioned him with his characteristic thoroughness disguised as casual curiosity. We learned that the company had struggled financially since Fenwick's death, that control had passed to Fenwick's son, and that they had recently begun producing a new chemical process that had restored their fortunes. Holmes inquired about the nature of this process, but Holloway became evasive, speaking only in vague terms about industrial applications and commercial confidentiality. Holmes expressed interest in seeing their manufacturing facilities, but Holloway declined, citing safety regulations and proprietary concerns. We departed, having learned much from what was not said as from what was. Back in our cab, Holmes permitted himself a small smile of satisfaction. "The new process is Cartwright's formula," he said with certainty. "They are producing it and profiting from it. The question is how they obtained it." Our inquiries continued through the afternoon. We visited the site of Cartwright's laboratory, now a vacant lot where weeds grew through charred timbers. The surrounding buildings still bore scorch marks from the fire that had claimed the chemist's life. Holmes examined the ground carefully, though 14 months of weather had erased most physical evidence. Still, he noted the location of the door, the position of the windows, and the layout of the ruined structure. We spoke with the fire inspector who had investigated the blaze, a forthright man named Gregson, who maintained it was accidental, but admitted certain details had troubled him. The fire had started in the evening when Cartwright worked alone. The door had been locked from inside. No accelerants were found. Yet the fire had burned with unusual intensity, consuming everything. It was as though someone had designed it to destroy all evidence, Gregson said. But I found no proof of arson, and the inquest ruled accordingly. We called upon Cartwright's widow, a dignified woman who received us in her modest home in Hampstead. She expressed no surprise that Holmes suspected foul play. Her husband had been frightened in his final weeks, she told us, though he would not speak of why. He had mentioned Fenwick's name several times, always with bitterness and concern. He believed someone meant him harm, she said quietly, but he had no proof, only suspicions. He told me he had hidden his most important papers in the safe place, though I never learned where. After his death, I searched his effects but found nothing. Holmes thanked her for her time and assured her that we would do everything possible to uncover the truth. By evening, we had assembled a damning circumstantial picture. Fenwick had wanted Cartwright's formula. Cartwright had refused to sell. Shortly thereafter, Cartwright died in a fire that destroyed all records of his work. Fenwick's company then began producing a process that matched Cartwright's research. But Fenwick himself had died 6 months later and that death, too, seemed convenient. We returned to Baker Street to find a telegram waiting. Holmes opened it with eager hands, read it quickly, and then laughed aloud. It was a sound of triumph. "Watson, we have him. This is from my contact at Somerset House. Aldous Fenwick's death certificate was signed by a Dr. Marcus Wendell. I took the liberty of inquiring about Dr. Wendell. He was struck off the medical register 2 years ago for falsifying patient records." The implications were immediate and stunning. "Then Fenwick is not dead," I said. Holmes nodded vigorously. "Precisely. He faked his own death, likely to escape suspicion for Cartwright's murder. He is alive, Watson, and in possession of a stolen formula from which he profits still. Our mysterious correspondent knows this and has guided us to this conclusion." "But who is this correspondent?" I asked. Holmes was already reaching for his coat. "That we shall discover within the hour. Come, Watson. We return to Fenwick Chemical Works. I suspect we shall find our answers there." The factory district was dark and silent when we arrived. The works itself showed lights in only one building, a small office structure separate from the main manufacturing halls. Holmes approached with caution, and I followed close behind, my revolver ready in my pocket. We reached a window and peered inside. A single man sat at a desk, bent over paperwork. Even from this angle, I recognized him from the photograph. Aldous Fenwick, very much alive. Holmes tried the door and found it unlocked. We entered quietly. Fenwick looked up startled, his face draining of color. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wondered if you would come." Before Holmes could respond, another voice spoke from the shadows behind us. "He came, as I knew he would." We turned to see a young man step into the light, perhaps 25 years old, with features that resembled the photograph we had seen, but softened by youth. "Edmund Cartwright, Jr.," Holmes said calmly. "I thought you might be our mysterious correspondent." The young man nodded. "My father spoke of you often, Mr. Holmes. He trusted you. When I learned the truth of his death, I knew only you could bring justice. But I had to be careful. Fenwick has eyes everywhere." Fenwick had risen from his desk, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You have no proof," he snarled. "The boy is mad with grief." Holmes regarded him with cold disdain. "On the contrary, we have your correspondence with the elder Cartwright. We have the formula you stole. We have evidence of the falsified death certificate. And we have young Cartwright's testimony of how you approached him months ago, attempting to buy his silence. You murdered Edmund Cartwright to steal his work, then faked your own death to escape suspicion. But you could not resist continuing to profit from your crime." What followed was a confession, extracted not through violence, but through the inexorable logic of Holmes's presentation of evidence. Wendell to issue the false death certificate. He had believed himself safe until young Cartwright began asking questions. The police were summoned. Fenwick was taken into custody. Young Cartwright thanked us with tears in his eyes. His father's name finally cleared. As we rode home through the dark streets, I reflected on the strange path by which justice had found its way. A telegram from a dead man had led us to the truth, though the dead man had not sent it. Holmes sat in silence, his face illuminated briefly by passing street lamps, his expression satisfied. When we reached Baker Street, he turned to me at last. "Justice, Watson, requires sometimes that we hear the voices of those who can no longer speak. Young Cartwright spoke for his father tonight. That is a noble thing." The case was closed, and with that resolution we returned to our familiar routines, knowing that whatever other mysteries awaited us would come in their own time.